Hit the fun and important button. All right. So hello and welcome to Sex After Dark with Erica Smith. My name is Tess Spencer. I'm the Assistant Director of the Center for Women and Gender Equity. And we are so excited to be here with the Office of Wellness Promotion and the Center for Trans and Queer Advocacy to bring you Erica Smith. I'm going to give a little tiny introduction for Erica, and then she's going to take it away. So Erica Smith is an experienced award-winning and nationally recognized sexuality educator, and she approaches sex education through a social justice lens. And a cornerstone of her belief is that access to compassionate, comprehensive, evidence-based sexuality education is a key component to wellness and equality for all. And her areas of expertise include LGBTQ issues, adolescent sexuality, and the sexual health needs of justice-involved youth. We are so excited to bring you Erica.
Thank you. I am so excited to be brought by you all. Let me share my screen. Give me 1 second. Okay. You see all my tabs? I'm one of those million tab people. Okay, so thank you all for having me. Thank you for that introduction, Tess. My name is Erica. My pronouns are she, her. And I'm going to talk to you, before I get into the presentation, a little bit about my college experience and where my sex education work began. So we are going to go back in the day to Penn State University in the late 90s and early 2000s when I was an undergrad. And yeah, I really got like in my feelings thinking about this today, because I was like, wow, it feels really good that I get to do this work and that I get to speak to people about sexuality, and that like universities want me to speak to their students. Because when I was a senior at Penn State, I graduated in 2001, my friends and I, in the like feminist women's studies queer community, we put together an event on campus that was called Sex Fair. It was incredibly controversial. What we did was we, used a common room in the dorm, and we had some tables with like literature about sex. We wanted to have conversations about consent. We had games. It was really fun. And I don't think it was that wild, but for the time, I guess it was, because what happened is a Pennsylvania state lawmaker, he was a state representative named John Lawless. I Googled him today and realized that he's a graduate of Westchester University. But he was so angry about our little sexual health and sexuality event that a bunch of students put on, that he showed up to it with a camera crew and recorded things that went on, and then took his video to like the state appropriations committee and tried to get Penn State's funding pulled because they had allowed some students to talk about sex at an event. And I just wanted to share with you some photos I found online. So this was an article in the Penn State newspaper. Sex fair stirs up controversy. So this person, she walked around wearing this bikini all night, and that's my handwriting on her back. And this is one of my co-organizers having an argument with the state representative about our sex event. And here are some choice things that the newspaper said about it. So I just want to read this to you. State Rep John Lawless made good on his promise to attend this weekend's student-run sex fair, but he didn't come alone, he brought a cameraman. I also want to note the organization that I was part of was called Women's Concerns with a Y. I feel like that is incredibly dated. People don't really spell women with a Y anymore, but we did at the time. I don't know what the organization is called now. So yes, we aim to discuss sexual health, consensual activities, and sexual liberation, which actually is exactly what we're going to talk about tonight. And he was so upset about it that he said, "This is a disgrace, and adults cannot do anything they want to." Reading this now, cracks me up, because so much of my sex ed career has been educating folks that consensually they can do anything they want to if it doesn't hurt anybody else and if it gives them pleasure. But at the time, he was not there to hear that. One of my co-organizers said to the newspaper, "I think mainstream Western society has a tendency to focus on heterosexual male pleasure. Now we would clarify heterosexual cis male pleasure. Language 20 years ago was not as aware and inclusive of all genders." So she was saying mainstream Western society focuses on heterosexual male pleasure when talking about sex. Anything that can be done to incorporate everyone else who is having sex that is consensual and safe is a good thing. So reading this really tripped me out because it's like exactly what I'm here to talk about. And I was like, holy shit, I went from getting followed by a state rep with a camera crew for talking about sex on campus to like actually being invited to talk about sex on campus. I don't know where this man is now, but I kind of wish he knew that I was still doing the same thing. So that's my story, and I was very excited to share that with you. So here we are. I want to always give a rules, community agreements set the tone for anything that I do that is sex ed related, because we're talking about a sensitive topic. I'm not here to talk to you about math. I'm here to talk to you about sexuality. And it's a topic that has all kinds of implications and values attached to it. So I want to make sure that we have set the tone here. It is okay if this talk makes you feel awkward or uncomfortable. It is okay if it also challenges you. It is my hope that it will challenge you a bit to maybe think about things in a different way than you had before. It's also okay if you don't understand everything that I bring up. This is why I would love for you to ask questions if possible. It's okay if you don't, it's okay if you laugh, because sex can be really funny. And I can't talk about things and not be funny. So it's okay to laugh. It's okay to be amused. I also want you to engage with me. So please chat in the chat. And I don't think Sarah or Tess, can I see the chat box, or can you interject and let me know when folks have said something to me? Okay, perfect. So this is interactive. I'm going to ask you to participate and share stuff with me. But if you have actual questions, I would love if you put them in the question box, because that way we can keep track of them and I won't lose any of your questions. Don't worry about your questions being too basic. We're going to talk about things like pleasure and consent and expanding your definition of what sex is. But when it comes to the Q&A period, you can ask me anything you want about sex and sexuality. So for example, I'm not going to talk about birth control tonight. I'm not going to talk about STIs either. But if you have a question about those things, it's okay to ask me. So really anything is fine. All right. So this is where I would love for we're going to get some participation here. Asking a very big existential question. What even is sex? And I want, whoops, okay. I would love if you would go into the chat and tell me not your definition of sex, but the mainstream definition of sex. What is the most common definition of sex? If you asked someone on the street, if you asked a parent, if you asked, anyone random, what would they say that sex is? Sarah, let me know if you have any answers.
Gotcha. Penis and vagina intercourse until the man orgasms. Penis and vagina, genital contact of any kind.
Okay. Oh, I see. I can see the chat too, which is cool. I didn't realize I could do that. So yes, the answer, penis and vagina intercourse until the man orgasms, and penis and vagina is typically what most people think of when they think of sex. And this is something that, as you can see on this slide, I've included a little clip art of an iceberg, because truly that is just the tip of the iceberg. Penis and vagina is a kind of sex, but there is so much more to explore when it comes to what sex can be and what sex is for a lot of people. I would also like to know in the chat, okay, sorry, I forgot the order of my slides. So if, besides asking a random person, if you look up what is sex, like if you Google it, if you go to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, it's defined as sexual activity, including specifically intercourse. And then intercourse is defined as sexual contact between individuals involving penetration, especially the insertion of a man's erect penis into a woman's vagina, typically culminating in orgasm and the ejaculation of semen. We know this, right? What I would love to hear from you is, what are the problems with this definition? Share with me in the chat, like, who does this definition leave out? Why is it problematic? Yes. Okay, we're getting some great answers. It does not account for LGBT people having sex. Sex doesn't have to end in orgasm. Sex doesn't always include insertion. It certainly leaves out women's pleasure. Lesbians, yes. Where's the lesbian representation? How do we have sex? All of this, exactly. So this, yes, this leaves out so many individuals' pleasure and representation. Thank you for these answers. This definition of sex revolves around penises, but specifically cis men's penises. It is not taking into account that other people besides cisgender heterosexual people have sex. It is a definition that is informed by patriarchy. It leaves out queer and trans people. It also leaves out cis people that just don't prefer penis and vagina sex. It definitely leaves out disabled people as well, because not everybody can physically do the act of penis and vagina sex. And it puts an emphasis on a sex act that isn't universally pleasurable for everybody. If you have, learned about sex or read about sex, you probably know that most people with vulvas require direct clitoral stimulation in order to reach orgasm. And having penis and vagina sex isn't always what is going to get a person with a vulva to orgasm or even to experience the most pleasure. So for that reason also, it's a problematic definition. So, some people with vulvas prefer oral stimulation, manual stimulation, and if we exclude everyone with this traditional definition of sex, it's just focusing on the people whose pleasure is most easily achieved this way, which is cisgender men, cisgender heterosexual men mostly. All kinds of reasons that it's problematic, and I love that y'all basically gave me all those answers. Now I would love for you all to get creative and tell me, how do you personally define sex? I've heard lots of different answers, and the cool thing is that there's no right or wrong answers here. It's just a chance to see what other people think of it and to be creative about your own definition. So share away and don't worry about being right or wrong. So some of the answers we're getting here: pleasure, and any activity that results in sexual pleasure in humans is my anthropology answer. Love it. A pleasure experience between two people, physical intimacy and pleasure between two people, intimacy that involves some sort of pleasure with either myself or another person who's hopefully feeling pleasure too. Yes. And the thing about these answers is that I could pick at all of them. And I'm not meaning pick in a critical, mean way, but like several folks said, a pleasure experience between two people. What if there's more than two people? What if there's one person? What if you are masturbating? Being intimate with a partner, the act of pleasuring yourself and your partner through a variety of acts. And from the Q&A, private parts touching other private parts. These are all wonderful answers. And the cool thing about it is, again, there's not any one correct answer. The point here is to expand our idea of what sex can actually be. And I'm going to share with you some of the other answers that I have heard recently when I asked folks this question. Somebody just yesterday said to me that they thought the answer was consensual sexual gratification. So of course I said, but what if not everyone feels gratified after it? Was it not sex? See, you can see how asking tiny questions leads to like, oh, okay, maybe I can tweak the definition a bit. The point is that there's no standard definition. I'm going to say that several times. Another one is engaging in acts for the purpose of achieving sexual pleasure involving at least one person's genitals. That's usually my definition. That's what I think of when I think of the expanded definition of sex. But there are other people that say that it's even more expansive than that, that it doesn't even have to involve genital contact, and that it doesn't even have to be done in person. So the definition here at the end, anything that brings sexual pleasure, defined however feels right in each moment. It doesn't have to involve genital touching. It doesn't even have to be done in person. So for them, that would include any kind of sex we have over technology, text, FaceTimes, DMs, cams, all that stuff. It's just a connection with another person that feels sexual. So quite different than penis and vagina. A lot more possibility if we expand our definition in the ways that you're seeing here. So next question is, who benefits from a more inclusive definition? Please share that with me in the chat. Who do you think benefits if we define sex more broadly? Everyone agree. Yep, LGBT people, queer people, lesbian, disabled people, everybody. Yep. I asked somebody I was working with this question recently, and she had this wonderful answer, which was like literally everybody, because it is when we expand the definition of sex and take all of the focus away from how a penis experiences pleasure, it's like another crack in dismantling patriarchy, which I thought was a really awesome answer and one that was like super broad. So queer people, not just people with vulvas, expanding our definition also rejects the notion that cis straight relationships are somehow normal, like the pinnacle of normal, that they're the kind of relationships that we all are trying to emulate. And it just takes the pressure off of everybody if we don't have to define sex in a patriarchal and binary way. Okay, next. Here's some other thoughts that I have. So if our definition of sex is much more than penis and vagina, it can take the pressure off of us to, quote, go all the way. Because if going all the way isn't one specific act that we've placed on a pedestal, then we don't have to like stop and be like, oh, like, am I gonna, you know, do it all the way with this person, and like worried that just kissing them or just touching them or having oral sex somehow means that you are beholden to have the penis and vagina regular idea of sex with them. Because if what you're already doing could be considered sex, it's kind of mind-blowing that you don't have to be looking at it like there's this big important act that you haven't done and that you feel pressure to do. Another thing that comes up for people is if we expand the definition of sex, yeah, it might mean that you've had sex with more people than you thought you did before, especially if you're somebody that does have like sex that appears heterosexual to the outside world. So if we stop defining ourselves by our number of partners, that's really liberating for everybody. So I think that when we are more expansive in our definition of sex, we can just let go of the idea that how many people we've had sex with even matters or is something that says anything about who we are as people and is any reason for shame. It definitely allows more possibility for pleasure. I think about Some of the folks that I work with as private clients are like cis heterosexual women who married young and have partners that are very focused on penis and vagina sex as like the main sex act. And when we talk about how they can expand their definition of sex, it suddenly brings up so many different possibilities, like all of these other things they could be doing for pleasure that are sex that their partners just completely bypass because they're going straight to the classic definition. It opens up many more opportunities for communicating with our partners. I bet if you asked your partners what their definition of sex was, they might have a different definition than you. They might have a definition that is similar but slightly different. They might have never even thought about sex in the same way. So if we all view sex in a more expansive way, it really opens up a lot of room to talk to people and talk to our partners about it. And also, it does not have to be the same definition for everybody. This is something I really want to emphasize. So when I said that my definition typically in my mind includes some genital contact, it doesn't have to. My definition doesn't have to be yours. The beautiful thing is that you all get to decide for yourselves, and it can even change depending on the situation and what feels right at the time. Oh, okay. Woo, sorry. Sometimes this is out of my, gets out of my control. Okay, so what I'm gonna show on the next slide is a list of things that could possibly be considered sexual contact. So I wanna it's almost like just a content warning that the next slide does include explicit sexual acts listed on it. So I'm gonna share that now, and it is things that may be considered sex other than penis and vagina. So just take a moment. Take a moment to this or take a moment to look at this, please. Now, you do not have to think that everything on this list of acts is sex. But these are things that other people may consider sex and that you may also consider sex sometime. Oh, a typo. Always comes out when I'm actually presenting. So yeah, is there anything on this list that anyone has a question about or has a strong feeling about as either definitely being sex or definitely not being sex? Yeah, so somebody said, love that you included BDSM. I'm glad you brought that up because something that I would like to really highlight is that BDSM can be sex, but not all BDSM is sex. So let me say that again, maybe with a little more clarity. Some people might consider engaging in BDSM to be having sex with a partner, but there are plenty of things that can be done in a BDSM context that aren't necessarily considered sex. So yes, Sarah just asked if I could expand on the definition. BDSM is basically kink. So it stands for bondage, domination. Am I going to mess this term up? BDSM, bondage, domination, sadomasochism. Sorry. Word salad. So it is sometimes folk sexual desires. We all have different sexual desires. For some people, that includes consensually experimenting with power dynamics and consensually experimenting with things like pain or intense psychological situations, always in a situation where folks are consenting to what they're doing. So there are some people that might consider engaging in that kind of play, like say it is spanking or tying someone up, as being sexual. But you can do many things that are BDSM play that never involve getting naked and never involve genitals. So it's one of those areas where it's up for your interpretation. Another comment, making out, not sure that's enough for my definition of sex. I am with you on that, Meg. I feel the same way personally, but if there are some people maybe to whom making out is the only thing available to them at the moment, thank you, Tess. Okay, there's so many words. Yeah, so for some people, making out might be the most they could physically be able to do with a partner. So perhaps their definition of sex would include making out. It's again open to anyone's interpretation for their personal situation. So Tess clarified bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, sadomasochism. I always mess up the order of those terms, so thank you. Foreplay is bullshit. The reason I say this is because foreplay is a term based on the idea that everything you're doing is leading up to the actual big event of sex, which is, of course, penis and vagina. So you've probably heard people use the word foreplay. I feel like it is definitely a like cis hetero term. I'm remembering like all of the women's magazines that I used to like read of my mom's when I was a kid, or like Cosmo or Redbook. It would be like, 10 things you can do is foreplay. I bet those are the things that are on my list of sex acts. So using the term foreplay is really, really exclusive, and it just contributes to putting the penis and vagina definition of sex on a pedestal as this thing that everybody is working to achieve every single time. I also would love to talk for a minute about virginity and what virginity even is, and how virginity is also a bullshit concept. Most people define virginity as the state of being you're in before a penis enters your vagina. Again, it is usually very focused on a cis hetero woman's experience. And the idea is that there's something so significant about this experience that it like changes you. You're different before and after. Your body's different. Your value is different. And, different folks place different emphasis on the importance of virginity. A lot of, yes, fuck purity culture, burn it down. Thank you, Susie. So a lot of my work, if you've looked at my social media presence, focuses on helping people unlearn all the harmful messages that they may have learned from their evangelical churches and their church communities. And virginity as this incredibly elevated thing is definitely one of them. So virginity is a concept, a social construct. It's not an actual physical state of being. Sure, you could be someone that had never had a penis in your vagina and then one day have that experience, but it doesn't change anything about you. It doesn't say anything about your value. And you also can't tell if anyone has had that experience or not, even by looking at their bodies, even by looking at their genitals. I want to focus a minute on the hymen, because that is something that is always used to back up the argument that like virginity is this concrete thing. So what a hymen actually is a small piece of tissue that surrounds the vaginal opening. And some people don't even have one. Some people are born without one. It is impossible for you or a partner to see or feel it, regardless of whether a person with a vagina has had experienced penetration. A hymen stretches thin over time. They also don't pop or break. So there's a lot of language around like, oh, they, pop their cherry, or I broke their hymen. That's not what happens. There may be like teeny little teeny little tears in a hymen, but that is not like the idea that it's something that breaks or pops is completely false. If people do bleed the first time they've had vaginal penetration, it also doesn't mean that they had a hymen break. Yes, okay. Gabriella just said something that I'm going to talk about in a second. It's so interesting. So some people do bleed when they have sexual penetration for the first time. It doesn't necessarily mean that their hymen broke. We can also just get like little micro tears inside our vaginal canals when we have sex. So again, it's not an accurate measure of virginity, and virginity is not a medical or biological reality. It's something that we place a lot of value on, and we use it to shame people. And when you expand your definition of sex, it really screws with the idea of what virginity even is. So like, is virginity somebody that's never had oral anal contact? Is virginity someone that's never used a vibrator? You can do so many of the things on that list of acts I provided you and never have P and V sex, and also say that you're a virgin because you haven't had P and V sex. So there's lots to think about and deconstruct here. And it's always good to question why we are believing what we believe so easily about sex and virginity. Gabriella shared, I'm sorry, I may be not pronouncing your name correctly. Recently read an article that a person who's getting surgery to reconstruct their hymen just felt losing their virginity again. Whew, yeah, that's a whole lot. That is a whole lot. Surgeries to reconstruct a hymen just feed into this unfortunate bullshit concept. So, pleasure. Why is pleasure important? Our bodies are designed to experience pleasure. A lot of people feel so much shame about experiencing sexual desire, or the desire to experience pleasure, the desire to be touched. But it is how, oh, thank you. Thank you, I pronounced your name correctly. It is just how we are designed as humans. We physically require touch. It doesn't mean we physically require sex or we will die without sex, but touch in general. So I don't know if you've ever heard the term skin hunger, but it is a term that refers to the fact that being touched is a physiological need we have. So like if a baby is neglected and a baby is set in a crib for hours on end and nobody touches or hugs that baby, it can lead to serious developmental issues down the line because it is so important to get touch. It's another quarrel I have with a lot of folks who tell me, like, growing up in purity culture, they weren't allowed to even like hug their friends lest it appear sexual. They weren't allowed to hug opposite gender friends lest it appear sexy. They weren't allowed to like hold hands with their same gender friends. People need to touch. It's good for us. A lot of different parts of our bodies can provide sexual pleasure, which again is important. Think back to the list of things we can do that are sexual with each other. There are people that will go crazy wild if you stimulate their earlobes or you stimulate their inner thighs. Those are parts of the body that can be incredibly sexual for people. There are people that can experience very heightened states of sexual arousal by touching their breasts, by touching their nipples, by, running your fingers down. I'm like doing all this by running your fingers down their arms or touching the back of their neck. So it's a fun thing to explore with a partner, that even focusing on our genitals as being the main act of sex leaves out the possibility of a lot of different kinds of pleasure. Again, how we experience pleasure is unique to all of us. So what feels wonderful to one person isn't so much going to do it for another. I don't want you to ever think something's wrong with you because you don't experience pleasure in the same way as like a partner or, a friend does. There are people that have a very easy time achieving orgasm and arousal, and other people for whom it's much more complicated. So that is unique to all of us. I may quickly go through this because I definitely want to leave plenty of time for questions, but what is arousal and desire? It is our body's response to desire in anticipation of or during sexual activity. It is something that churchy folks would call lust, but it's arousal. It's us feeling like we are interested in sex because we feel a physical response. So many different kinds of things can cause us to feel desire and arousal, and this is normal. You might have a dream that makes you feel aroused. You might smell a scent. You might see somebody walking down the street or get a random thought in your head, or like crack open a book and read a particular sentence. All of those things can cause us to feel desire, and this is a normal, healthy experience. A lot of folks have been taught that feeling desire and arousal is a shameful thing, that it's something that is, out of control and it's a bad emotion that we need to tamp down. And I just want you to know that it is a perfectly okay thing to feel. Folks who fall on the asexuality spectrum may not experience the same amount of desire and arousal, or the same amount of desire to engage in sex with partners. But so I just want to make sure we address that as also completely normal. One thing that drives me up the wall is the idea that, has anyone heard the microwave versus oven analogy? You might have heard this, not just if you were growing up in like a church youth group, but I feel like it's kind of a pop culture stereotype. What this means is people say, oh, binary language, men are like microwaves. They just heat up in a second. They're ready to go. And women are like ovens. You have to preheat them. This is a really, really reductive way to think about sexual desire. People of all genders can experience arousal in a myriad of ways. To say so, it's an oversimplification to say that, like, male assigned people or cis men only experience desire in this way and everyone else needs to, heat up slow like an oven. Not true. Just want you to know. There's such a wide range of what is considered normal that there kind of isn't a standard. So probably anything you experience, if you're easily aroused, if it takes a lot of stimulation to get you aroused, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that nothing is wrong with you. Orgasm, we all reach it differently. Some people require a lot more stimulation in concentrated areas than others. Some people can have orgasms fairly quickly. It doesn't even have to be the goal of sex, which is another way to kind of expand our minds about having sex with partners. Sometimes, we've often used a baseball metaphor for sex, like you're going to get all the way and we're like trying to achieve this end goal and we're trying to score. That's a really simplistic way to look at sex. And sometimes we can relax and enjoy it just for the process of it and just for the pleasure it provides, without having to think that we are always going for an end goal. Not that there's anything wrong with orgasm, but just letting you know that. There's also no orgasm hierarchy. So if you're somebody that can only achieve orgasm through a certain specific sex toy or a certain specific position, or you're like very fancy vibrator, that's okay. There's nothing more like organic or special or natural by achieving orgasm through a partner's, mouth or hand or genitals. If you can't do that, and there's nothing wrong with you. There's no such thing as like one type of orgasm being better than the other. So long ago, when Sigmund Freud was writing books, he had this terrible idea that there were two kinds of orgasm, and that anyone who, for people with vulvas specifically, his theory was that if you had an orgasm through clitoral stimulation, it was incredibly immature of you. And that if you had an orgasm through vaginal penetration, this was what real women had. This is what we should all aspire to. I hope even just me saying that registers with you as like total wacky bullshit. It doesn't matter what kind of pleasure you like to receive. It's all just as valid as any other kind. Regardless of how you may achieve orgasm or how you may achieve pleasure, no kind is more mature than the other. I also don't want you to get caught up in like reading the latest article on like Refinery 29, which is a perfectly great website. I give commentary to them a lot, but sometimes you'll see articles that are like 10 different kinds of orgasms and how you can achieve them. Not every single person is built the same way, and not every single person responds to stimulation the same way. So just because somebody can have an orgasm through this particular kind of penetration, or through feeling this feeling through their vaginal wall, or through this kind of specific toy, doesn't mean that everyone can do it, and that you need to like create a checklist and that something's wrong if you can't. So just don't get caught up in chasing whole bunch of different kinds. There's a lot of pop science around it, but not a lot of research around it. And this leads me to why communicating with partners is crucial. So I like to talk about communicating with partners during sex, like cooking a big meal together. You don't know what anyone likes to eat unless you ask them. You don't know if someone is going to be complimentary to you, dining out style, what you like, what they like, if you ask them. You would never go into a kitchen with your partner and think you're going to construct a big meal together without ever talking about it. You have to be like, hey, will you chop this for me? Will you turn on the stove? I'm in your way. Let me move aside. There's a lot of communication that has to happen, but it's the same goal as sex because you are both co-creating a mutually pleasurable experience together, an experience that you're both going to enjoy, and you have to use your words. The problem with a lot of sex that we see, yes, safe words are golden. Instruction words are golden. I'm going to give you lots of great examples of those. So the way that sex looks on movies and TV, it's always silent. Like people just start making out, and before you know it, they're like having sex, they're penetrating, they're like laying down, they're doing all kinds of stuff, and nobody ever utters a word. Maybe sometimes that happens. That kind of sex certainly happens, but it is not ideal, and it's not realistic to think that you're always going to be perfectly in sync, in tune, and choreographed with the people that are your partners. It is important to talk during sex and to say, this feels good, this doesn't feel good. I'm going to give you, like I said, lots of examples. If you're somebody that's never spoken up during sex, it's going to feel weird at first, but it is important and okay to communicate. Be clear with your partners and ask specific questions. I know folks get real tripped up if somebody says, what do you want me to do to you? That's such a vague, open-ended question. So I would hesitate to ask something like that and instead give them a choice. Like, would you like me to do A or B? Which sounds better to you? Which sounds, more enjoyable to you? Don't think of a partner giving you instruction or redirection as a rejection. So we all have to mind our own feelings. Like, we want our partners to tell us what works for them, and we want to be able to share that with partners and not let our egos get in the way. I'm going to wrap up in the next few so we have some time for questions. Don't worry about ruining the moment. I like to say that you risk ruining the moment if you don't say what you want, or don't say what feels good to you, or don't assert a boundary. That could really ruin a moment. There's a lot to lose if you don't speak up when you want to speak up during sex. It's also okay to laugh. It doesn't have to be serious all the time. And if you won't speak up for your pleasure and or your boundaries, who's going to do it for you? So these are examples of things that you could say when it feels good. And when you see them listed out, it's like, oh yeah, like say, don't stop. This feels really good. I like this. I like what you're doing. I like the sensation. Even making like affirmative vocalizations can be helpful. Silent sex is not the goal. Another is if it's not working, if it's just not working for you, if you need an adjustment, there are plenty of things that we could say to our partners, like, let's try something different. This feels good, but could you do it a little slower? Could you ease off on the pressure a bit? Can we switch positions? I don't think that this is working for me, but let's, cuddle instead. There's lots of things you can say when it is not working for you. These are just some examples. I put down here, I would love to add my vibrator to this because I want you to know that it's okay to use toys with partnered sex. It can be a wonderful experience, and it's not a threat to anybody. It can just enhance, not take away. The wonderful thing about talking during sex also is that there's so many opportunities to continually check in and get consent if we're talking, if we're speaking up. So asking like, how does this feel? Is this working for you? Is this good? Are you comfortable? Do you like this? And this doesn't mean we have to like chatter away the entire time, but you'll know when it feels okay to speak up. And there are lots of things you can say that assure and demonstrate that you care about your partner's experience. And then there's just random crap that we have to say sometimes. And here are some of the ones that are pretty common go-tos. Hand me the lube. Do you need some lube? I need to go pee. This pillow is suffocating me. My leg is falling asleep. Turn the fan on. Kick the cat out of the room. The dog is on the bed. This is also just another opportunity to remember that sex can be funny. I have asked a lot of folks, tell me a funny story that happened to you during sex. And so many of them involve like falling off the bed, or like the dog running in, or, like the cat vomiting on the bed. Like, just lighten up. It's okay to lighten up. And there's lots of things that, lots of things that we have to talk about when sex is happening. One of the things that I think is super wonderful, if communicating verbally during sex feels insurmountable or challenging, the idea of it, one of the best things that you could do with a partner is check out a yes, no, maybe list. And that is a list of all different kinds of sexual activities and sexual situations that you may be comfortable with. And you can go through the list together or separately and compare and say, like, yes, I would do this. No, I would never do this. Maybe in a fantasy, I would do this. One of the best ones around is from Scarleteen. I put their name up here, Scarleteen. If you just Google Scarleteen, yes, no, maybe so, you will find the most incredible, comprehensive yes, no, maybe list. It was authored by a friend of mine, CJ, and Heather Karina, who is the founder of Scarleteen. They are brilliant. The code, it'll tell you, like, put Y for yes, N for no, maybe, fantasy, not applicable. But the yes, no, maybe list from Scarleteen doesn't just talk about, like, yes, I would do oral sex, or no, I wouldn't do anal sex. It also talks about things like, what are your boundaries, and what words are you comfortable using to describe your own body parts or your gender identity. So some of the things that are on the Scarleteen yes, no, maybe so list are these. What body parts are off limits if you don't want to have those parts of your body touched at all? Are there things that may trigger you about body boundaries? What terms can be used to describe you and your gender? What terms can be used to describe your body parts? What terms can be used to describe your identity? And what words would you never be okay with having used to describe you? Or what words would make you deeply uncomfortable? Highly recommend finding this list online. I'm sure, Sarah, I can send you a link, but you can probably find it very easily as well. It's a great resource. So go forth and seek your consensual pleasure with an expanded definition of what sex can be, keeping in mind that communicating is of utmost importance and that nothing about your value has anything to do with the kind of sex you have or the amount of sexual partners you have. So that is what I have to say. And I have time for questions. This is a little rendering of my dog. I like to bring him into my presentations. So I would love to hear questions that have been coming up in the chat if we have any.
All right, so we do have one question already. If folks want to, you can submit those questions in the Q&A down below. You are able to submit questions anonymously, so no one has to know who is asking. All right, so our first question is, through taking a class on sexuality concepts and social work, we had a discussion on whether heterosexual and homosexual being outdated or offensive terms. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. Homosexual is an outdated term that can be offensive to folks. I have never really found heterosexual to be an offensive term because it's not a term that describes marginalized people. But homosexual is definitely out of fashion. One thing I will say is that if this interests you, maybe you already learned this in your sexuality class, but the entire concept of heterosexuality versus homosexuality is relatively new. Hannah Blank wrote an amazing word about, I think it's like the history of being straight, or the book is just called Straight, but it's a history of like how we even developed these concepts and ideas. And the word heterosexual used to mean, the definition was like an unhealthy interest in the opposite sex. And there's really, like, it's a new concept. Like, several hundred years ago, we didn't even use those words. So I like this question because it also raises the point that language evolves and shifts and changes all the time, especially when it comes to sexual and gender identities. And if it interests you anymore, I would definitely, I'm going to put the name here. Hannah Blank is the person who wrote the book about like the history of, oh, it's called Straight, The Surprising History of Heterosexuality.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We
Sure.
have a few other questions coming in.
Mhm.
So this one says, I'm going to my first kink event on Thursday and I'm terrified in all caps. I have PTSD and I'm afraid that once I lay out all of my boundaries around what I can and can't do without being triggered, no one will want to play with me. I'm not planning on playing my first time, but I mean in general. Do you have any tips or reassurance?
I really have a lot of reassurance. You are not going to be the only person in the party or in the community that has a lot of boundaries. Um, so many people are drawn to kink because they find it a healing experience, perhaps healing of past traumas they have had. I I have never spoken to anyone who enjoys and is involved in kink who is a person of marginalized experience, like a woman or a trans person or a queer person who hasn't experienced something that they are healing from. So you are not going to be the only person at the event with a whole lot of boundaries, and you are not going to be, I can't even imagine a situation in which you would have so many boundaries that people would just be like, nope, we're not gonna engage with you. Um, Folks who are involved in a kink community tend to be so mindful and respectful of consent and people's boundaries. So I know that it can be a scary experience doing anything so vulnerable that you've never done before. But my money would be on the fact that there are going to be plenty of other people who have similar PTSD experiences and similar boundaries around what they will and will not do, and you will not stand out.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that answer. All
Sure.
right, we've got another question. How do you have the STI talk with partners?
This is a wonderful question. So, first of all, I want to say that we do so much communicating digitally that you don't have to have this conversation in person. I know that can like feel like a barrier to some people. Like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine sitting down and asking somebody, when the last time they were tested was. So, use whatever communication you're using already. If you talk to them over, text or DMs or whatever. And an easy way to say that is just, hey, I was last tested for you can start with yourself. You can start by saying, I was last tested for STIs in September of 2020, and I tested negative for, share what you tested negative for. How about you? It really normalizes the experience of getting tested and invites them to share. I do find it to be a red flag if a person doesn't want to talk about that at all with you, or if they get defensive with you about it. But really, one of the easiest things is to just say, this was my testing experience. What is yours? Then you signal to them that you value this conversation and that you value sexual health. You can also, if you Google the term like scripts for talking to partners about STIs, there's some wonderful stuff out there. The Planned Parenthood Federation of America website has some STI scripts for talking to partners, and I've seen other articles too that are really great. A website I want to share with you all, I'm going to put it in the chat, is helloclue.com. So Clue is the name of a menstrual cycle tracking app, but their website is really awesome and has so many great articles about sex and sexual health. And the Clue website, I believe, has great resources for talking to partners about sexual health, including casual partners.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that question. We
Sure.
have another question. is it common for someone to not be able to come or orgasm yet to still have a pleasurable time during sex?
Absolutely. There are people who I've worked with folks who thoroughly enjoy sex and tell me that it's great, and I believe them, but they will also say, like, I'm not sure if I ever had an orgasm, but I feel like I'm enjoying sex a lot. So absolutely that can be a, a normal situation for people.
Great. It'd be great if I unmuted, right? We have another question, and folks, please feel free to keep submitting questions in the Q&A. This question says, I have a friend who I suspect has a porn addiction. Should I try to have a difficult conversation or help them?
This is a really interesting subject. There's a lot of debate and a lot of misinformation around whether or not porn addiction is a thing. And I'm putting thing in quotes because I know that the way people use pornography can become problematic, but it is not something that is recognized as an actual addiction. You may have heard people say things like porn changes your brain chemistry, and when you like watch so much porn, it changes your brain. The latest research shows that that is actually untrue, and that what contributes to people's compulsive use of porn has more to do with the shame they feel around using it than anything else, which I think is a fascinating thing. It reminds me of food and binge eating, where if you've ever been on a diet or spoken to someone that has had, issues with binging or dieting, they might tell you that the more they tried not to eat something, the more tempting it was. And the more they felt bad about eating it, the more likely they were to like go back to, eating everything in sight. And that seems to be the way that pornography works for some folks. So the more, like, there was a study where the result of the study was that what drove the men, I believe, like cis men in the study, to use porn most compulsively was the amount of shame and religiosity in their lives. So all that to say, if you have a friend who you feel like the use of porn in their life has become problematic, I think that it is not unreasonable to want to talk to them about it, but definitely do a little more digging about if it's an addiction or not. Because I think just saying to someone like, I'm worried you have a porn addiction, would be like very inaccurate and probably something that would cause them to shut down. So perhaps approach it like, it kind of worries me the way you're using it, or the amount you're using it, or do you ever feel like it's getting in the way of your regular life, and try to go from there.
Great, thank you so much for that answer. We have another question in the Q&A. So this one says, I'm ready to start having full-blown anal. We've been doing fingering at the moment. Does douching help for anal?
So it's one of those things that is not completely necessary. You can have anal sex that is not messy, without having to use like flush your rectum out with liquid, aka douche. So you can buy the little like bulb syringes and do that if that makes you more comfortable. It wouldn't be wrong to do that, but it's also not necessary. So the thing about anal penetration is there's kind of this misinformation that, I'm going to be just like real graphic because we're talking about anal sex and sex in general, but there's misinformation that there's always going to be poop in our rectums. There's really not, unless we're going to go to the bathroom, unless we have to go to the bathroom. And you can usually tell when that is. So if you know you've gone to the bathroom recently, or you don't have to go to the bathroom anytime soon, the chances of running into fecal matter are very slim, because it's not just going to be hanging out there. It may not be uncommon to get a little bit on the end of a condom, and that could be avoided by using like a bulb syringe douche. So you know what's more comfortable for you. If you're somebody that's like, I would literally die if that happened to me, so I'm gonna go use a douche, that's okay. But again, it is not necessary.
Great, thanks for that answer. We've got another question that is related. So is a douche dangerous to use? I'm sure it's changed over the years, but I've always been told that a douche is not good to use.
Yeah, so what I'm assuming is that we are talking about vaginal douching here, which is 100% unnecessary and can actually be harmful to the natural flora in a person's vagina. So the bacteria that exists in vaginas naturally can be harmed if we introduce like water and chemicals and vinegar, and there's no reason to use a vaginal douche. Anal douching, just like a little bit of water up, up in the rectum. I keep doing this, like a little bulb syringe. That is not as harmful. It would be harmful if you were douching anally with harsh chemicals and you were doing it all the time. That could actually like create irritation and micro tears in your rectum, which would be then making you more susceptible to STI transmission, and that would be a concern. But all that to say, vaginal douching, don't need it, don't do it, isn't good for you. If you have more questions about that, I highly recommend the book, The Vagina Bible by Dr. Jen Gunter. It's really, it's called The Vagina Bible, but it's all about vaginal and vulvar health. And it is so fascinating. And she goes into everything you would ever want to know about like pop culture things like vaginal steaming and rejuvenation and douching, and basically tells you that you don't need any of that, that our bodies are fine the way they are.
Fantastic. Thank you for that answer. We've got another question in the Q&A. So this one says, how do I determine where I am on the asexuality spectrum? I think I'm demisexual, but it's also complicated, and I'd like to have a better idea than just blindly guessing because I don't know what an average level of sexual attraction is.
So I am so sorry to give you a non-answer answer, but truthfully, there's not like a test or a way to tell anything for sure. You get to decide how you feel inside and what label you want to use for that, if you want to label yourself at all. I work with a lot of folks who will tell me like, I think I might be asexual, but I also think that I just was raised with like really screwed up beliefs about sexuality and I don't know which it is. And I feel like it's okay if, I mean, the truth is it's okay if you are asexual, if you fall anywhere on the asexuality spectrum, but you might have to also be comfortable just living in sort of limbo without putting a label on anything. It's really hard to say definitively, these are my exact attractions and this is how they are and this is my label, because the thing about our attractions and desires is that they can also shift throughout our lifetime. Sometimes people will say like, yep, I'm totally asexual. I don't want to have sexual contact with a partner. I don't feel much sexual desire for like masturbation or anything, but that can also shift and change, and that is legit too. So my answer isn't probably going to be what you're looking for, because what I have to say is that you kind of just have to get used to not having like a clear idea of what it is and being comfortable with that. Nobody else can diagnose you. Nobody diagnose, not as if it's a bad thing, but nobody else can say like, yes, you're asexual, you experience this amount of desire exactly, or this lack of desire exactly, so therefore we're going to like give you a label. You get to determine how you feel inside and how you label yourself.
Great, thank you so much for that answer. I want to encourage folks again, please feel free to use the Q&A function. Erica, I'm actually going to ask you a question that I have of my own.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm curious, because you began this program by talking about your experience as an undergrad. What is one thing that you wish you had known about sex when you were a younger person?
Oh,
If there is just one. If there are many things, you can say those too.
yeah, that's such a, what's so funny is I ask my clients this question all the time and I just have never asked myself the question. So thank you, Tess, because I love this. What do I wish I had known about sex? that, oh gosh, I think that the thing that I struggled with the most when I was younger was queerness. Knowing that queerness was okay and that it was all okay. I have my answer now. Um, I don't have to pick a label or stay in a lane. I had a lot of struggle when I was younger figuring out, okay, I know I'm not straight, but I also know I'm not a lesbian. What am I? Um, and bisexual is a label that I'm comfortable with now, but there was so much stigma around that term like in the late 90s that it's like it was synonymous with like, I don't know, like slutty and synonymous with like somebody that was just like kind of crazy. I don't mean, I'm using ableist language as to illustrate, like that's what people said about it. Um, and then I was like, I thought I'd figured it out at one point. I thought I was a lesbian. And then I realized, no, that's not true either. So I spent a lot of years feeling super confused and letting other people's confusion affect me too. Because I would get questions that were like, but Erica, I thought you had a boyfriend. Are you full on gay now? Someone actually asked me that if I was full on gay. Which my friends and I just turned into using the acronym FOG. Like, are you FOG? So I think, yeah, what I would tell myself is that like my sexuality was gonna grow and change and shift, and that I still learn new things about it all the time. My desires change, my arousal changes, my body changes. And that's just a normal part of the journey. And I think that's really important. And it's easy to say that now, but I didn't know that when I was younger.
Yeah, absolutely. I laughed a little when you described the full-on gay conversation because I feel like I'm also bisexual. I like that's the label that I use, and I feel like
Mhm.
every person who's bi or pan or isn't just like one thing.
Binary something.
Yes, that there are a lot of questions that happen about like, oh, are you gay yet, or
Mhm.
are you gay now? I
Right, like it's a stopover on the way to Gay Town.
Yes, I have had so many conversations. This dates me a little bit about that Sex and the City episode about the bisexual guy. I wrote a whole paper about it in grad school. I know that makes
Oh,
me old,
thank God someone did.
but yeah, it was like some really bad bi representation if you want to talk about
It
uh,
really was.
not representing queer folks in an appropriate manner. Whoo, Sex and the City did like a real bang up job.
I
Um,
know.
but
It's
thank
a problematic fave.
it is because on the one hand, hey, someone was finally talking about sex, but on the other hand, whoo, they did not do a great job.
Yeah, I tell anyone who watches it for the first time in 2020, I'm like, Carrie Bradshaw was a terrible sex writer.
He didn't even ever talk about sex. That should have been called relationships in the city. Like, come on.
True.
Oh, well, thank you so much for answering that question. We do have a little bit more time still. So again, I want to encourage folks, if you want to submit questions in the Q&A, please do. I'm going to ask another question of my own because I'm kind of a curious person.
Yeah.
So I, as part of my own background, have done some sexuality education primarily with high school students. And I found myself getting a lot of questions about confusion about types of barrier methods. And I was curious if you could talk a little bit about what barrier methods work best for what things, because I feel like everyone kind of assumes by the time you get to college that you know this, but not everybody does.
Yeah. That's a great question. So barrier methods, we would define those as like a piece of latex or polyurethane that we place between our sexual parts and another partner, a person's sexual parts. So like between our mouths and someone's genitals, between our mouths and someone's anus, between a penis and a mouth, a penis and vagina, etc. So the most common barrier method that people know about is a condom. It's kind of like everyone knows what a condom is pretty much. There are different types of condoms though, and something I think we don't talk about often enough is that they're not a one size fits all thing. We can make, you know, you can go and buy larger condoms, but they also sell smaller condoms, which some people may need. And it is no shame if you do, because the better the condom fits you, the more likely it is to stay on and be effective. Condoms are also made of different material. There's polyurethane, which is good for people that have latex allergies. And the standard latex condoms are fine for a lot of people too. Um, Another barrier method is the dental dam. So this is a plastic square that is made out of the same stuff a condom is made out of. And we would place it between our mouth and a partner's body part. So a partner's vulva, a partner's anus, and be able to provide them with oral stimulation, but not have our mouths and mouth fluids touch their body parts and body fluids. And I know that you sent participants packets with some of these items in, right? One thing I think folks should know is that once you're out of college, dental dams are really hard to find. You can get them at your health center on campus, and you can usually get them at like a Planned Parenthood or a free clinic that does sexual health testing, but like you can't just walk in CVS and buy a dental dam. And it's really annoying because they are the best method of the best barrier protection for oral sex on people with vulvas and for oral anal contact. It's also important for some folks to use condoms for oral sex on penises, depending on your comfort level with doing it without or how well you know your partner, etc. So yeah, I think that's about it.
Awesome. Thanks so much. We've gotten a couple more questions.
Oh, I gotta let my dog in the office. He just whined a bit.
You go ahead and do that, and then I will ask the questions.
Go ahead.
All right, wonderful. Okay, so we have a question that asked, how did you end up doing what you do? I think I want to be a sex educator / therapist, and I don't really know where to start. I'm majoring in social work with a double minor in sexuality studies / women and gender studies, so I think I have the subject area down, but I think it sounds like they're curious to know how you got started as a sex educator.
Yeah, well, if you're already doing like social work and women and gender studies and sexuality studies, you have a massively solid foundation of knowledge, and like that's awesome. So I was a women's studies major at Penn State. It's probably called women and gender studies now, but it wasn't at the time. And I focused on like reproductive health. That was my area of study that I cared the most about. And my first job out of undergrad, I actually worked in an abortion clinic, and I would do things like educate and counsel the patients. And I learned so much from that job. So I would recommend, like, after college, you can get entry-level jobs in organizations that focus on sexual health and reproductive health. The field of sexuality is much bigger than sexual health, than like the reproduction part, but that was where I started. And there are a lot of organizations that do like HIV work and reproductive justice work, and that was my entry. So I went like the public health sexuality route. So I worked at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia for a long time, and I still do actually. I have like a bit of a role there with the gender clinic, so working with transgender youth and their families. So like my path through sexuality work went through the public health, like HIV, reproduction, sexual health, STIs, that kind of thing field. There are other folks who have very different paths, and they might work in sex stores and do educational workshops at, sex shop boutiques and online. That's also like a perfectly legit way to go. I did get my graduate degree at Widener University, which you might already realize or know is local to the Philadelphia area, and is the only graduate program that teaches you how to be a sex educator or sex therapist. There are other graduate programs that study sexuality, but Widener's the one that like teaches you how to teach sexuality. And there is a clinical track. There's also a wonderful sex therapy program at Jefferson University. So yeah, there are lots of different ways to be a sex educator. And I now do most of my work with an online platform, and that's also a super easy way to get into the field. So I'm going to recommend a follow, an Instagram follow. Cameron Glover is a sex ed business coach. She's a sex educator herself, and she helps sex educators monetize their work and create platforms. And she's brilliant. And she has like a sex educator starter kit and a starter webinar. And also, like, you can email me personally if you have more questions about this. I love talking to like emerging sex educators.
That was awesome. Thanks so much for that answer. We have a couple more questions in the Q&A. So the next question we have is thoughts on growing up kinky and the sexual development of people who have been kinky from a young age. I just found out about some research about this, and I was so excited to find out there were others like me who used to find the air quotes weirdest things sexually arousing as a kid.
Yeah. I'm curious to know what kind of research you saw recently because it might be research that I don't even know about. I don't remember seeing anything that new. Um, but kinks kinks are like a perfectly normal part of sexual expression, and I like to think of them as just in the range of what people desire. So it's not like if you have a kink, if you've had like, kinky thoughts since childhood, you are weird or different in some way. Oh, growing up kinky. Oh, yes. Awesome. Thank you for that link. Yeah, I've seen this too. So, yes, research does show that some of the kinky thoughts that people might have sexually do start early in life. Um, and I don't really know. Can you repeat the question? I feel like I might have missed the part that I'm trying to answer.
No problem. So, thoughts on growing up kinky and sexual development of people who've been kinky from a young age. This person was excited to find out there were other folks like them who found things sexually arousing that were unusual
Yeah.
or kinky as a kid.
Yeah. Okay. My thoughts are that you do you and be into what you're into without shame. There is, I also think, no reason to try to analyze, like, why am I this way or what might it mean about me? We all just have different things that we like and that we're into. And I think that it is cool to just give yourself permission to pursue those kinks and interests and not feel like you are an outlier or not feel like there's something wrong with you. To me, it's just part of the range of normal, healthy sexual expression.
That is so awesome. So, we have another question. Can you share some thoughts on navigating biphobia in a hetero relationship and thoughts on feeling valid in one's sexuality?
Yeah. Oh, wow. I have been in these relationships, so I'm happy to share, not just from a professional experience, but a personal experience. I'm a queer cis woman and I have dated cis straight men. And I'm one of those people that likes to remind everyone that I'm queer when I'm dating a cis man because it's important to me. It's an important part of my identity and I don't want that to be erased because the partner you're with in any given moment doesn't say anything about your identity and attractions. The person that you are having sex with or you're dating doesn't define you and your sexuality. Like that's something that comes from within. So even if you are dating someone that makes it look to the outside world that you're heterosexual, know in your heart that that's not you and you get to be who you are. And if you want to wear your bi pin or wear your queer button or like still participate in queer community and in queer political action and in a queer fantasy life, I always encourage the people that I work with, like, just because you have a partner that makes your relationship appear cis hetero doesn't mean that in your head and in your masturbation life and in your fantasy life you can't still, be, I guess, what's the word? Not indulging, but like being with your queer desires. Like that part of you doesn't have to go away. So just take comfort in knowing that you you are still queer and it doesn't matter what anyone says and it doesn't matter what it looks like to other people, that your queerness is inherent in you and nobody can take that away from you.
Thanks for that awesome answer. Our next question says, I've been taking birth control pills for years and I'm really tired of taking them, but I also don't want to get pregnant. What are some alternatives to birth control pills that you might recommend? I've heard a little about IUDs and new apps and things, but I feel like people really only talk about condoms and birth control pills.
Probably what you would like the most, my guess, based on your question, is a birth control method that you won't have to think about that is also incredibly effective. So that's what I'm hearing is important to you. Like you don't want to get pregnant, so you want something that's incredibly effective, but you don't want to take a pill every single day. So I would recommend checking out an IUD or talking to your doctor about getting an IUD. There are several different kinds. There's a kind that has hormones that, prevents ovulation. And there are also there's an IUD that's made out of copper. So the copper repels sperm, and you can't get pregnant on a copper IUD, but it doesn't have hormones in it. Not everyone not everyone loves a copper IUD. For some folks, if they already have painful periods, it can kind of make their periods feel more painful to them. If you go on the Planned Parenthood Federation website, there's actually a quiz you can take about what birth control info might work best, or what birth control method might work best for you. So it's like this really great quiz. You can go right in and it'll say like, what's important to you? Like being really effective, being really convenient, not having hormones, etc. I'm guessing that if you took that quiz, it would probably tell you to try an IUD. Another thing you could try is the implant, which goes in your arm. It's like a little rubbery plastic thing that goes right under the surface of your skin, and it'd only feel, you can't see it, but you could feel it a little bit. And those last 5 years. IUDs tend to last anywhere from 5 to 12, depending on the brand you get. And somebody in the chat said, I have an IUD and can speak on my experience. So yeah, talk to other people that have them and see how they feel. Most folks who have IUDs tend to love them, and they never have to think about birth control.
All right, I think we are about at time, so I'm going to ask one last question, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely.
We received a question that was submitted via our social media, and this one says, can you talk about how to get consent in a casual sex setting?
Yeah. The thing about getting consent is that it's going to be the same no matter what kind of relationship, situation, or structure you're in. So whether it's somebody that you are engaging in sexually with the first time, or somebody that you've had sex with before, you really just have to ask. Do you want to have sex? Does this feel okay? I feel like I'm up for XYZ. Are you comfortable with this? A lot of the little scripts that I gave in this presentation would work for that. Like, how are you feeling? Is this okay for you? Do you want to, like insert sex act here? Like really just asking. I know it can be awkward and uncomfortable, but getting consent is so important. And asking and getting verbal consent is the most clear, best way we can do it. So yeah, regardless of whether it's casual or not, just ask.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all of your wonderful and insightful answers and for joining us this evening. I think we are about at time, but I wanted to thank you again so much for your presentation and all of the valuable and wonderful answers that you gave us tonight. For folks who are interested, we have recorded this session, so it will go on the Wellness Promotion YouTube page after this, so that you can watch it and share with folks who maybe couldn't join us tonight.
Oh, cool. I love that it's going to be up there, because I've had people who aren't Westchester students be like, how can I see this? And I'm like, well, you can't attend it unless you're a student, but it's cool that it'll be online.
But you can watch it.
Awesome. I love that. I'm going to send it to my mom.
Yes, send it to your mom. Absolutely send it to your mom. But we will definitely make sure that for folks who registered, they get the link to that. After this presentation, we'll also make sure that it gets closed captions so that it's accessible for everybody. But I wanted to say thank you all so much for joining us. We hope you have a great rest of your evening, and awesome. Good night.
Thank you so much, Tess and Sarah and everyone. I really enjoy working with your university in general, so I appreciate you having me.
Thank you.